the closing session of the 34th International Papillomavirus Conference. I'm Ann Birchall, co-chair one of the co-chairs of the conference, and what a week it's been. I've just been blown away by the presentations and the energy of this meeting. We're over 1,200 delegates from 90 countries, and we've all come together in the spirit of research and education for HPV elimination. And I'm here with Margaret Stanley, co-chair also of IPVC and president of IPVS. Margaret, how has this week been for you?
Busy. Busy, but absolutely wonderful, because during the time of COVID, it's been a tremendous inhibition of the ability to do research, because the experimental labs have been closed, or researchers have only been going into their labs for short periods each day. Trials have been interrupted because there've been lockdowns and you can't access the patients. And clinical management's been interrupted. And so with all of that, I was really very anxious about what we would be having submitted to this meeting. I didn't need to worry. It has been stellar science, and I can only congratulate those who've done it and thank them for presenting it at this meeting. Now, I know you've got some presentation awards, so you're going to take us through it?
I would love to. So one of the things that we really wanted to make a place for at this conference was early career researchers, and really drawing attention to them and encouraging them to stick with this field because it has so much to offer. So I'm going to talk now about the Early Career Researcher Best Presentation Awards. And I want to thank especially the judges who worked with me to select these. So first, I'm going to talk about the presentation awards for the best e-poster presentation. So the first best e-poster presentation in the basic sciences track goes to Hannah Van Wyck from the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, who had a poster on unique fusion genes identified in HPV-associated head and neck cancers. So congratulations to you. In the clinical sciences track, the best e-poster presentation goes to Hidenori Tanaka of the Osaka University Graduate School of Medicine. And the poster was diagnostic performance of oral HPV DNA, oral HPV RNA, and plasma circulating tumor HPV DNA for HPV-related oral pharyngeal cancer and cancer of unknown primary. This should say the best e-poster presentation. This is in the Public Health, Epidemiology, and Implementation Sciences track. The award goes to Christopher Scott Weatherly of the University of California, San Francisco for risk factors associated with anal HPV infection and men who have sex with men aged 50 and older, preliminary results from the AHA study. And now, one of the things we did in this format, in the online or virtual format, is we offered on-demand short oral presentations, and there's fantastic presentations in that collection. So I encourage you to keep looking in there in the next 3 months that you'll have access. Among the early career researchers, the best short orals were in the basic sciences track to Diti Boyleson, forgive me if I'm mispronouncing names, for therapeutic vaccination against early PV genes, elicits T-cell responses in PV-infected NHPs, and shows single-agent therapeutic effect against murine tumor growth. The best short oral presentation in the clinical sciences track goes to Karena Valesky at McGill University, and her oral was HPV detectability and cervical cancer prognosis, a systematic review and meta-analysis. The best short oral presentation in the Public Health, Epidemiology, and Implementation Sciences track goes to Joanna Wick of the Institute of Clinical Sciences at the Sahlgrenska Academy, University of Gothenburg, Sweden. And she did a talk on local cervical excisional treatment, cone length, and risk of preterm delivery, a register-based study from Western Sweden. And now for the best full-length oral presentation awards. In basic sciences, the award goes to David Williams of the University of Arizona for his presentation on single-cell transcriptomic analysis of primary cervical keratinocytes following HPV-18 infection, identifies protein arginine methyltransferase 1 as a regulator of HPV gene expression. In the clinical sciences track, congratulations to Daniel Fadden at Harvard Medical School for circulating tumor HPV DNA for the diagnosis of HPV positive oropharynx cancer. And last, but certainly not least, Best Oral Presentation Award in the Public Health, Epidemiology, and Implementation Sciences track goes to Jamie Xing of the National Cancer Institute for potential unmasking of high-grade cervical dysplasia caused by non-vaccine targeted HPV types in a population with bivalent HPV vaccination, the Costa Rica HPV vaccine trial. So I hope that you, if you haven't had a chance to see these fantastic talks, I encourage you to take a look at them, and congratulations to all our presenters. Really great work. So the next piece in our closing session is going to be words of a message that will come from Dr. Maurizio Matzah. Now, Dr. Matzah is a regional advisor for cancer prevention and control at the Pan American Health Organization, or PAHO. Among his many accomplishments are that before joining PAHO, he was the executive director for Basic Health International, a nonprofit organization working on the elimination of cervical cancer, where he supported the Ministry of Health of El Salvador in the implementation of successful primary HPV screening and treatment. So today he's going to speak to us about PAHO's cervical cancer elimination campaign.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I know that many people will be joining this international conference from different time zones. I'm really excited to be here at IPV presenting the work that PAHO is doing in the region. My name is Maurizio Matzah. I'm the regional advisor for cancer prevention and control here at PAHO. And I'm just going to share a little bit with you about the work that PAHO is doing in the region. To begin with, I have to say that I have no conflict of interest to disclose. So as you all know, cervical cancer is a disease with a lot of inequities around the world, mainly affecting Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, but the American regions are no exception of burden of this disease. As I said, mainly Africa is affected. We know that countries in North America, like the US, that have been doing secondary prevention for decades, have had a big impact on this disease. But countries in Central America, the Caribbean, and South America vary significantly, even within regions, the burden of the disease. So we know that about 72,000 women will be diagnosed with cervical cancer, and roughly around half of that amount of women will actually be dying of cancer on a yearly basis. The mortality and burden will depend on the conditions and various risk factors like HIV. We know that women with HIV have a higher risk of developing cervical cancer. Now, in the fight of this disease, the good thing is that we know that HPV causes cervical cancer. We have a vaccine for the primary prevention. We have new screening tests for HPV detection and proper treatment for secondary prevention. And we also know that detecting on early stages will help us cure women that have cervical cancer. Now, if we continue doing the coverage of screening and vaccination that we've done historically, we're really not going to make a dent on the burden of the disease. But if we just do intensive vaccination, it'll take us about 100 years for us to eliminate this disease. But if we include intensive screening, proper follow-up, and vaccination, then we can make a burden on disease on an earlier time. We believe that in the Americas, if we do this by 2030, we can see a reduction of about 30% on the burden of the disease. So the important thing in every talk that we're giving is remind people that we have very clear targets, which are the 90, 70, 90 targets of 90% vaccination of girls by the age of 15, 70% screening with an HPV test by the age of 35 and 45, and ensuring follow-up of 90% of women with pre-cancer or invasive cancer all the way to palliative care. So briefly, I'm just going to go through where we are as far as coverage with vaccination screening. We know that HPV vaccine has been introduced in most of the countries in the Americas. Now, the variation of coverage changes from country to country. Some countries are with very close to the target of the elimination, and other countries need to work a lot on it. But the great thing is that we've started with the implementation, and we need to support countries to ensure that they can get to the levels that they need to get to by 2030. As far as the screening, there's also variability from country to country. Very few are going to reach that 70% target that we have. And it's very important that we work closely with them, because this is probably where the biggest shift is going to be as far as like what the paradigm will look like from a cytology-based or VIA programs that they would have to HPV testing with or without triage for treatment. So this is probably going to be one of our biggest challenges. And we've seen how more developed countries have already started screening with HPV testing. And unfortunately, most of the countries that are in the greatest need for this are either just in pilot projects or in the need to actually scale their programs. So we've had experience with HPV programs in the region. Mexico has been doing for a very long time. We've had great research projects in Argentina, in Peru. We know that Colombia has been working on that. El Salvador has a primary HPV screen and treat strategy, countries in the Caribbean. But we need, and there's the different countries with the scale project that PATH conducted in Guatemala, Honduras, and Nicaragua. And now JPIGO and Expertise France through the UNITAID project working in Guatemala, also introducing HPV testing. So there's experiences that are happening throughout the region, and we need to learn from those experiences and try to scale. Treatment is probably the hardest part that we can actually get information, because not a lot of the countries have the indicators, and with COVID, there's been an impact, and we need to, but through COVID, we've also learned that we have new ways to communicate and reach women that are in need. So to sum it up, over 40 countries have HPV testing, including in the Americas. The coverage varies significantly from one to the other. The same thing we can see for screening, with very low coverage for most countries, and just a few countries have introduced HPV testing in some way or the other, and it's very hard to ensure that there are, how are we going to close the gaps in pre-cancer and cancer treatment? So what are we doing to communicate this to the different regions? We are working on this project with MD Anderson, with their great experience on the ECHO session, the NIH, the NCI, and PAHO, and talking to different experts within the region. We have over almost 300 people registered for our first ECHO. Most of them were physicians and worked at ministries of health. And now, as we go to ECHO 2.0, we have over 400 people registered. And we basically talk about those three pillars: vaccination, screening, and treatment. And we're starting to identify where the possible problems and biggest gaps are to support those countries. PAHO works closely with other UN agencies, and the great initiatives that they have, the International Atomic Energy Agency, the International Agency for Research of Cancer, works closely on the different national cancer control prevention programs, and their impact missions. And these are opportunities that we take to tell countries, when you're thinking about, now that you're looking at your programs, you have to think about the initiatives for the cervical cancer elimination. For those that don't know, PAHO has different offices in countries and in the sub-regions with colleagues that support the work that is being conducted, and we have a lot of great consultants that help us do different analysis. This is an example, Dr. Duncan and St. Kitts and Nevis, understanding what's the coverage of vaccination, of screening, and how can we actually improve those areas. In Antigua and Barbuda, hopefully with the support of Basic Health International, we will be able to start the implementation of the NHPV manual that was done by WHO on how to introduce HPV testing through different technologies. And then this is an example of IARC working with the PAHO office and Dr. Leticia Katz. I asked for a couple of slides from her and sharing their experience in Pernambuco in Brazil on how they're going to be shifting in a project that's going to screen 100,000 women from pap smear based system to an HPV system. And then just to end the talk, there's new resources available for the elimination of the strategy. There's you can go into our website. You can see the educational campaigns and virtual courses that we've done before the launch last year of the strategy to eliminate cervical cancer. There were a lot of documents that would help countries and different organizations introduce HPV testing. Since the launch, there's been a significant amount of material with new guidelines and updated guidelines of management of precancerous lesions done. So you can access this in our website, and I invite everyone to join and disseminate in every opportunity that they have when we're talking about this, the importance of the 90, 70, 90 targets. Thank you very much for your time.
I'm sure I echo everyone's thoughts around our thanks for those words from Dr. Matzah, and really how inspirational it can be when people collaborate regionally and internationally to meet our goals for vaccination, screening, and treatment. I now have the great pleasure of introducing someone who has been near and dear to me for a long time, Dr. Eduardo Franco. He's a professor in the Departments of Oncology and Epidemiology, chair of the Department of Oncology, and director of the Division of Cancer Epidemiology at McGill University in Montreal, Canada. His research is focused on epidemiology and the prevention of gynecologic, anogenital, oral, prostate, and childhood cancers. He's also very involved in academic publishing. He's editor-in-chief of Preventive Medicine and Preventive Medicine Reports, and senior editor of eLife. He's an officer of the Order of Canada and fellow of the Royal Society of Canada and of the Canadian Academy of Sciences. And these are some of the highest accolades a person can have in Canada. One other thing I'd like to mention about Dr. Franco is that he's also been an incredibly generous mentor to many of us in the HPV field, including over 80 graduate students and fellows, and I was one of them, many, many undergraduate students, and he's been an informal mentor to colleagues around the world, and I'm sure many of you in the audience have been mentored by Dr. Franco. So I greatly look forward to his review of HPV research, past, present, and future.
Thank you very much, Anne. Thank you for this wonderful introduction, and thank you, Margaret, for being the friend that you have been to me for over the years. This is such a privilege and an honor. And I as you know, I consider my membership in our IPV community my most important professional engagement. And I hope this presentation will convince you of my fondness and gratitude for what you all represent in this community. But first, let's get some things out of the way. This is my disclosure slide, and I do not have any conflict of interest, but I'm proud to disclose that I have been asked to advise pharmaceutical and biotechnology companies to assist them in developing good products to advance human health. Here's what I would like to talk about over the next few minutes. I'll discuss the evolution of HPV research as a timeline that clearly shows the growth of the field, and as if we needed to be alerted of that. I will then try to dissect the components of this growth and the most prominent stakeholders. I'll also compare our field with that of vaccinology in general. And I'll then provide a few tips for those entering a career in HPV research while spending some time having fun celebrating with all of you, members of our community. And finally, I'll invite you to reflect at the uncertain times we live in right now and consider the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead. And but before I start, I wish to thank my student Parker Tope for her monumental work on the cytometrics of HPV research, some of which I'll be showing you in this presentation. But let me start with one of my favorite eureka moments in my research on HPV and cervical cancer, which characterizes how the molecular epidemiology of the association between HPV and cervical cancer got it right by gradually, as you can see here chronologically, by gradually removing the measurement error that had plagued early work that you see here. It is simple. As our measurement instruments improved, so did our ability to understand a biological mechanism from a very small association in the early studies, large studies, as you can see in the Hpv study, to finally the Nubia Munoz study published in the New England Journal of Medicine in 2003 with associations that showed the true magnitude life. And so the emphasis here is on the subdomains of research and policymaking in blue here, that help propel prevention and control of HPV infection and its associated diseases. Right at the top here, you can see how the proper measurement improved our understanding of how much cervical cancer is caused by HPV. And eventually now we have also lent that same expertise and understanding to other HPV associated cancers. So this has been a product and the product of labor of a variety, the succession of generations of epidemiologic studies that evolved from case control cohort studies and have become more and more sophisticated. In more recent time, big data surveillance approaches such as using NHANES and other massive biobanks. So this improvement in measurement came thanks to the improvements also in the HPV diagnostics, which began with Southern rods and filtering site hybridization in the 80s, and eventually moving on to tests that had some hope for clinical development, eventually PCR protocols, also a learning curve with those PCR protocols, and then eventually clinically very validated assays that we're now bringing into primary screening. And also the progress in the fields of studies of screening and successive approaches in that. The first use of HPV testing were in ASCO's triage and eventually evolved into co-testing and primary HPV screening. And the HPV vaccine efficacy trials began in the mid 90s and eventually all the way to recent times. And now we have a lot of publicly funded studies that have picked up momentum after that. And we have a large and successful community of modelers and mathematical epidemiologists who have done a lot in terms of advancing our understanding and translating that knowledge and fitting the missing pieces of the puzzle so that we can move forward. And none of that would have been possible if it weren't for the fact that there was political will by professional societies, governments, and all of that in moving this field forward. And of course, then 2020 brought the pandemic here, which has colored all of this in terms of how we move forward. But this is in general a panorama of what public health research has been. What about the science that's behind all of that? Well, that's a straightforward graph that shows the growth of HPV science in terms of annual published papers that are part of the HPV that refer to HPV from 1975 to present time. As you can see here, there's an equivocal growth from less than 100 papers a year before 1982. The growth of HPV research output has been remarkable, approaching now 5,000 papers per year. But then one might argue that this has been the case for all of biomedical and life sciences research, which is true, but the next slide shows how we can control for that growth. And this is it. So now we have to contend with a log scale here so that we can accommodate everything. So the same red curve that you saw in the previous slide is now flattened because it's in the log scale against this left side y-axis here. And you have in black here the entire biomedical literature shown in the black curve. So we're talking about 76 million papers since 1975, of which about 1,000 of which are HPV papers in general, on average over the entire 46-year period. So the latter, this curve here, which is the overall growth of the biomedical field, was 5.9-fold between 1975 and 2021. But the HPV science output, which is shown in the red curve here, grew 94.6 times since then. This remarkable growth in relative terms can be seen in the blue curve, which is against this side y-axis here, the secondary y-axis, which is simply a rate of HPV papers by the entire literature expressed per 1,000 articles out there. So as we are today, with about 1.3 or so per 1,000 articles out there are HPV articles. So it is truly a superb growth. And I'll also like to argue, and I'll be doing this shortly, that this growth can be divided into three phases or eras, which you can actually appreciate in the blue curve here. And I'll explain that as I move on. But all that science that I showed you tends to be shown first at this very venue, the International Papillomavirus Conferences, which the present one is the 34th installment. Thanks to Suzanne Garland, who sent me pictures of all IPVCs that she attended. You can see the voluminous material that constitutes the annals of our scientific gatherings. And here they are. So all 34 events since the first one held in 1982 at Cold Spring Harbor, down here, and the number of delegates are in red, and the number of abstracts are in blue. The first few years, as you can see here, were nearly entirely devoted to basic science, and then over time they became more eclectic. Again, the publication of the first HPV vaccination papers in this mid-period here from 2004 to 2007 is a clear demarcation around this period. And then the number of delegates, as you can see, rapidly increased substantially. Malmo in 2009, right here, and the Berlin in 2011 broke the 2,000 delegate mark as a reflection of the ongoing excitement with HPV vaccination that characterized the times there. But let us re-examine the research growth in relation to specific milestones. That's the red curve that I showed you early on, but now in blue. And I'm putting contacts with different things that have happened over the last 46 years, nearly 50 years. So from the early phase here, the discoveries in basic science, cell biology, molecular biology, the demonstration from pathologists of the HPV cytopathic effects in cervical cancer, and eventually demonstration of HPV 16 and 18 DNA in cervical cancer, the biological evidence showing that E6 and E7 interfere with cellular mechanisms of P53 and RB genes. And at that time, the IARC convened some important meetings to bring together the experts on that science. In 1995, the IARC for the first time defined HPV 16 and 18 as group 1 carcinogens. That was a very important milestone at that point, which brought the biotechnology and pharmaceutical companies to the dialogue. The first use of HPV testing in ASCO's triage began at this point, eventually with co-testing, and the first vaccine trials, which had begun in mid-90s, eventually were published in 2002, 2004, and 2005. And then you can see the explosive growth in this post-vaccination era with additional events. Harold Zurhausen received his Nobel in 2008, and additional things, a 9-valent vaccine. WHO called for cervical cancer elimination, and the COVID-19 pandemic began then. So those three areas that I alluded to you, we can more or less characterize as follows. From 1975 to 1995, more or less at this at this period, it was the expansion of basic science research and establishment of the knowledge base that allowed us to move to prevention. From 1996 to about 2005 was the translation of the basic science knowledge into clinical and public health uses, such as HPV testing and the onset of clinical trials of HPV vaccination. And then from 2006 onwards, the post-vaccination era, as we can call it, and the coming of age also of HPV testing and cervical cancer screening. So it is truly a magnificent process here of our own community. So you're to be commended for all of this. But which countries drove the scientific productivity in these 46 years? And here they are. So divided by the same three eras that I just alluded to you. So you can see here on top, United States for all three areas is dominating, not surprisingly given the size of its scientific community. The UK, Germany, France, Japan, and Italy have also been consistently on the leaderboard, followed by Canada, Australia, and the Netherlands. A few countries have improved their rankings over time. For instance, you can see Brazil here from 23rd in 1975 to 8th in the most recent period. Or you can see China, which was 12th in the first period, and now it's a very strong second in the most recent period here. Well, the U.S. is on top there, and not surprising because of the size of the community, but also the size of the funding input that comes into it. And it's driven, all that research is driven by massive funding resources that this graph shows, which is a composite graph that shows the infusion of funding as the red curve here in relation to this axis, and like in comparison with the number of projects in dark blue here, and number of sub-projects in light blue against this axis here. So as you can see, there was clearly an unequivocal point of watershed moment here in 2006 when things jumped in 2007 and beyond. The number of projects requiring funding, and they were funded, eventually moved this field forward enormously. So funding peaked last year at nearly $350 million a year of just fueling all of that. And all of this funding assisted the U.S. institutions to be leaders in the output, as you can see here. But much U.S. public funding also benefited HPV research in other countries because of the lateral sub-projects that happen in collaboration. The first era here was dominated by the expansion of basic science, and the two subsequent eras by the translation of these discoveries into clinical and public health implementation, as I argued with you. Now, let's see the people in these institutions that are truly driving this appreciable output here. And here they are. Actually, here you are, as you can see in those three eras, and the top performers here in each one of those areas. So the first area, as you can see here, we see mostly basic scientists, including molecular and cell biologists, virologists, and immunologists, and you also see pathologists in that group. And then the second era here, you see clinician scientists, epidemiologists, diagnostic virologists, and basic scientists also participating. Remember, we're now translating all of that science into action, which becomes very clear in the third era, which is dominated by epidemiologists, public health practitioners, diagnostic virologists, clinician scientists, and behavioral scientists, which the whole field of vaccinology came to assist this major effort. And many of these people who you saw in the previous slide, they struck gold as they pursued their research. Citations are the most concrete metrics of influence and impact in the literature. And in this table here, you see, and this is the first of two tables, you see the top 7 most cited papers, the whole HPV field. And there are the 3 are molecular epidemiologic studies, as you can look at based on the titles here. One is a seminal basic science investigation, this one here. And one is a clinical study, and 2 are review articles that have been highly cited. The famous Valboomer's paper, 1999, is an indisputable leader. So, 6,700 citations, and we all have cited it in our grants and on papers over time. And here's this table complements the leaderboard with 15 papers that passed 2,000 citations. It includes clinical and epidemiologic studies, as you can see here, basic science papers, and one report on STD guidelines. Now, just to give you an idea what it is to be cited more than 2,000 times, only 0.02% of all papers that have ever published have received more than 2,000 citations. So it's truly an elite in terms of publications. Now, let's move on to an attempt to dissect all of this productivity, all this research output by field. So Parker Tope and I, we conducted a series of searches for specific subdomains, which I will be showing you next. And these are, for technicality, these are just the terms that we use for these searches, which I'll be showing you next. In this slide here, we show the various subdomains of research, plus a general one on HPV vaccination in green here. So you can observe the watershed moment in 2005 with the entry of vaccinologists and behavioral scientists into HPV research. And you can see here in yellow, HPV on head and neck cancers gained prominence shortly after that. And this is a very important field of study in all of HPV research that we have. And where were these papers published? So these are the journals publishing more than 500 HPV papers in this 45-year period. And these are leading journals in terms of content. Journal Virology was the leader from 1986 to 2004, more or less. Vaccine began to lead by the time HPV vaccines were approved, as you can see here, except for the explosive growth you can see in purple here of PLOS ONE, which is lost prominence later on. PLOS ONE is a mega journal that truly started producing a lot of HPV science content. But then it lost momentum, and now we're back again with Vaccine and International Journal of Cancer as major outlets for HPV science. Now, what about papers that have merited the premier medical journals or science journals in general? So this is the HPV papers that have landed in the pages of journals in the Lancet group, Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, New England Journal of Medicine, Nature, British Medical Journal, and the Journal of the American Medical Association. Clearly, HPV research has become very prominent in the last decade, with frequently appearing on the pages of these prestigious journals. Now, this is a complex list of journals here, and I don't mean to show you all of you, other than show due diligence in picking up the top journals with a minimum of 70 HPV papers in this 46-year period. So I use these groupings of journals by discipline in an attempt to identify how HPV research evolved in these specific areas that you see here. Obviously, these journals are not the only ones in these areas, but they tend to publish the most HPV papers, more than 70, each one of them. And so let me show you what the results are. So here's the different fields here. So you have basic science research, which was dominating and using the approach that I just described to you until 2005, more or less. And then it was surpassed by clinical gynecologic content, pathology and cytopathology. They had a very steady growth here. But what I truly find remarkable is the gain in prominence of head and neck HPV science during the last decade, which you see here in blue. Now, we keep talking about vaccines and all of that. And what about the science of the vaccines in relation to all of vaccinology? So we can look at perspective, the whole field of anti-vaccines and the science related to vaccine hesitancy and all of that. And this is a very complicated graph here, which has a log scale to present the number of papers that have been published. So 2021 is not over yet, and the number of vaccine-related papers has already passed 34,000 this year, with a clear new rate of increase relative to 2019, as you can see here in this jump here, 2021, and likely because of the pandemic. Anti-vaccine related papers, either in favor or against, or just science related to vaccine hesitancy and anti-vaccination, have increased dramatically from less than 20 papers, as you can see in the dark red here, to more than 1,000 this year. And in fact, anti-vax papers more than doubled since last year, as you can see this jump here in 2021, and 21 is not over yet. Anti-vax papers, HPV papers, which are shown here, have also increased at a much faster rate than the entire HPV field and or HPV vaccines specifically. Now, how have we looked into the future? Many of us, different researchers, have produced reviews on the gaps in knowledge and research direction. Some have conducted opinion surveys, as you can see here, among colleagues, while others have written consensus reports as part of conferences. I invite you to access these publications. They should be part of any library for an HPV researcher. And in addition to that, we have educational resources that have been produced regularly. Our community is unique in the wealth of educational resources. Thanks to Xavier Bosch, the chief editor of HPV Today, and now of HPV World, the successor. This established knowledge is available to all in the internet. I highly recommend the book that he edited with David Jenkins. It has some real gems in terms of the history of how we got to this point. Xavier Bosch, incidentally, received today the Hillman Award for his monumental contributions to advance the field of prevention of HPV-associated diseases, and as a great educator and leader. And of course, we heard Dr. Maurizio Matzah with respect to the most exciting thing we have right now. And the cervical cancer elimination effort is rallying our community. And it's probably the most prominent right now of our community's hopes and dreams that we have there. This is just showing a special issue that was produced by Anna Juliana and Linda Nicolai, members of our community, and with a collection of papers, very thoughtful papers and empirical research from more than 100 scientists, and showing possible ways to move forward. Now, I have a few slides showing that show our community at its best, attending conferences and celebrating. Sadly, a few of these people are no longer with us, and we miss them a lot. As you can see here, these have been memorable moments throughout these conferences and opportunities to get together. And hopefully we're going to get back to that. More on what truly counts, the bonds that are formed over the years in these conferences. I'm particularly have been blessed with friends that I have acquired over the years. And we also take part in parallel events at these conferences, celebrating birthdays, as you see here. And if you're wondering, no, Luisa is not sitting on Tom Rohan's lap here. And how often do you see Jack Cusick wearing a hat? So it's truly extraordinary. More wonderful memories, and here's lots of people in these conferences and opportunities, even with, here's Xavier Bosch with his kid, and here's an embarrassing moment. I'm trying to express my admiration to Robbie Burke, and while others look on here. And here's some more, a little bit of everything, from looking very professional, as you can see Tom Broker here, and all of these clinicians here in a roundtable discussion, to just looking goofy, and which is the way we should be, and being very comfortable. And if you remember slides back in the old days in carousels and PowerPoint and all of that, well, we no longer need that. But then things happened. And the expected impact of the pandemic came and has derailed a number of things that we have been doing. HPV vaccination was affected, in addition to being assisted by the anti-vaccination movement, suspension of school-based vaccination. Cancer screening in general was heavily affected. Suspension of screening programs has also decreased visits to primary care providers, and everything else that the COVID-19 pandemic did on healthcare capacity. And this, of course, eventually is going to lead to an increase in HPV-related cancer incidence. But there are also great opportunities that we can use this. Implementation of self-sampling has become a major flagship idea, adopting more inclusive, non-elitist approaches to cancer control. We heard this from Gina Ogilvy and a number of speakers here, building resilient screening and vaccination programs. There were sessions specifically designed for that, and implementing more rational surveillance programs, integrating electronic health systems so we can have a better view of what society in general deals with that. Forecasting was never an exact science. And as you know, there's also affecting funding to HPV research. So we should expect some turbulent times, but not that we do not have the collective talent to face that. We do. And part of that goal lies on curating the science that will help us to resume progress in preventing HPV-associated diseases. Another attempt here led by Mona Sarai and Linda Rabenek. This was a special issue of Preventive Medicine, which brought together 146 authors from 19 countries to contribute a collection of papers which represent the best population-based evidence for the world experience on the impact of the pandemic on cancer screening. And I also call your attention here that with Diane Harper and I, we're inviting a broad call for submissions on the impact of the pandemic on the entire continuum of cancer prevention and care. eLife, as you know, is one of the sponsors for this IPVC, so please visit their booth and flash your identity card there. There's much to hope ahead and things to look forward to, and the poignancy of the difficult period that we find ourselves in is best captured by this wonderful bit of wisdom. Yesterday is history, tomorrow is a mystery, and today is a gift. That's why it's called the present. And just in good humor here, let me show you a version for the academic community. Yesterday is relative, tomorrow is speculative, but today is electric. That's why it's called current. And this brings me to the end of my talk. I have no summary slide, just this. And as of last Sunday, these are the smiling faces of those who orchestrated this conference for you, led by Ann Birchall and Margaret Stanley, with logistical management by our friends at Kennis. As you can see, everybody looks great and everybody looks like they're coping very well, but we look forward to being physically close again in Kyoto in 2023. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Eduardo. That was absolutely spectacular. With pictures of our colleagues who don't look much like that anymore, I have to say. But it was a wonderful whistle-stop tour through Sao Paulo.
Right. Oh, I miss those moments.
But again, thank you very much. Now, they've given me 5 to 8 minutes to talk to you all, because this is my last papillomavirus conference. This is the second conference I've had to organize. And unfortunately, it's been the second virtual conference due to the COVID pandemic. But I need to thank you all for actually attending this virtual meeting. I know virtual meetings are difficult because we can't interact, we don't see our friends, we don't have the conversations which are so valuable in generating ideas, reinforcing our friendships, and actually starting new collaborations, and just keeping the engine of the science going. Now, although it's been not a face-to-face meeting, what Ann Birchall and I have tried to do is optimize the virtual platform, because the virtual platform has a lot going for it. And first of all, don't have limitations on time and space. So we can be innovative and flexible in how we organize sessions. And we can invite people to generate their own sessions rather than a top-down hierarchy that says A, B, and C will be the plenary speakers and they are the only ones who can give their view. So the specialist or special interest symposia were an attempt to engage a wider community, and people who had something they really wanted to say, and they had a collection of people they wanted to help them say it, and we gave them time and space to organize their symposia, and I hope people have found that worthwhile. The other thing we wanted very much to do was to integrate young researchers in our community, because if we don't keep a constant recruitment of young and passionate and innovative people, then the research dies and the whole field becomes less attractive. Now, Eduardo has pointed out that even though we've been through a disaster with the COVID pandemic, there's always a silver lining. And I am someone who thinks that yes, there are problems, yes, there are drawbacks, but there are always solutions. And that's what we have to do. We need to look for solutions. We need to recognize that COVID has had some positives. For a start, I've traveled very extensively educating people on what antibody is, how you generate immune responses, really quite basic stuff. Now, I don't need to tell anybody what antibody is. Now, even babies in their cradles know what an antibody is. They know what antigen are. They understand population coverage for vaccines. Vaccines may generate powerful emotions, but we're watching and seeing in real time the effects of vaccines in preventing disease or controlling disease. And that is a massively important message which we can take forward. COVID has also brought technological change at an extraordinary rate. So vaccine platforms that have been in experimental preclinical trials for some years suddenly were transported into the active domain. They've been in big RCTs, the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines, mRNA vaccines, and now the workhorse for vaccination against COVID. Adenovirus platforms have been around. They are also a workhorse for COVID. So this has been a dramatic impact on the vaccine technology. And it will continue because, of course, COVID has been a wake-up call. It's not when we have it's not if we have the next pandemic, it's when. And that has been a very forceful lesson for everyone to learn. Now, when we come back to our conference, whatever happens in a conference, what really matters is the quality of the science, because that is the thing which is of importance. And by any standards, I think this meeting has been characterized by extraordinarily good science. And it's been a pleasure for me to actually listen, and being able to recall the sessions has been hugely useful. But it's also illustrated the resilience of the papillomavirus community. As I said initially, the experimentalists have been impacted because PhD students couldn't get into the lab, the postdocs couldn't get into the lab. Screening trials have been interrupted because women were in lockdown. Schools were locked down, so vaccination delivery has been impacted, but the trials in places like Southern Africa and in the Far East, they have been impacted by the COVID pandemic. But nonetheless, people have soldiered on, and we've had extraordinary science, both at the basic level and also from the trials in Southern Africa, for example, for one dose. Now, this is all being characterized by passion and determination of the people who are doing the research. And I think that's a characteristic of the HPV community. And I'll tell you a little story. I've attended every papillomavirus conference since, I think, the second one. I did so long ago, I can hardly remember. But one that I particularly enjoyed was that organized by Ian Fraser and his colleagues on the Gold Coast in Australia in the early 90s. It was a fantastic meeting. We had a great time. And afterwards, there was a second closed meeting that took place on a ship or a launch off the Barrier Reef. Now, you have to put yourselves in the position, all these scientists load themselves onto this quite nice launch in what is one of the most idyllic spots in the world. Do they go snorkeling? Do they go fishing? Do they go swimming? They do not. They cluster themselves down in a closed lounge, watching slides, because we didn't have PowerPoint, watching slides as the sun shines outside and the world's most wonderful biological diversity is ignored. And it's that passion, that curiosity, that desire to know, which characterizes HPV scientists and researchers. And that's what encourages me in thinking that this community is strong and it's determined. And I think we're in good shape for the next few years at least. And thank you. It's been a huge privilege to be part of this community. I've enjoyed organizing this conference, even though my hair went totally grey. And I want to thank you all again for coming. Thank you.
Margaret, I now want to take the opportunity to thank you. It's just simply been the highlight of my career to be involved in this meeting and to have the privilege of co-chairing this meeting with you. I'm really just in awe of your mastery of the field, your dedication to advancing HPV research and science, and most importantly, your commitment to really work on and achieve cervical cancer elimination. It comes through in each and every meeting and encounter I've had with you, virtual as it has been, but it's just simply been delightful. And for everyone should know that Margaret has tremendous energy for this. There's been so many meetings and emails, and often these are happening into the wee hours of the night, and there she is working away at it. All of us owe you an enormous debt of gratitude for what has been surely an outstanding success of this meeting. If we were in a big conference hall right now, I am sure you would get a standing ovation. Thank you, Margaret.
That's very kind of you. Thank you very much. But it's been a real pleasure, a real pleasure. Toronto has done us proud.
I guess we now have to talk about the next meeting as Toronto comes to the end. And the next piece of this closing session is going to be talking about the future, as Eduardo was encouraging us to do, and the future meeting of IPVC 2023 that is going to take place in Kyoto. So we're going to hear from the next two co-chairs of IPVC 2023, who are Professor Suzanne Garland and Professor Toshiyuki Sasagawa. So I'm going to just talk about who they are, and then I have a very important ritual to do. So Professor Garland is the director of the Center for Women's Infectious Disease at the Royal Women's Hospital and professor at the University of Melbourne Faculty of Medicine, Dentistry and Health Sciences and the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology. She's an internationally recognized clinical microbiologist and sexual health physician with expertise in infectious disease. And I'm sure known to so many of you. She's a regular advisor to the WHO on sexual and reproductive health, cervical cancer, and HPV. Now, Professor Toshiyuki Sasagawa is a professor in the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology, Division of Gynecology, and Obstetrics Research in Microbiology and Cancer Immunology at Kanazawa University. And they will carry on the proverbial torch of IPVC. And one of the ways that we mark the occasion of passing on that torch is the IPVC talking stick, which I received from Dr. Sylvia San Jose and Margaret after Barcelona. So there's been a tradition of the passing of the talking stick that was started at the 22nd IPVC that was held in Vancouver, Canada, and hosted by Joel Kulewski and Barbara Masicki. And that meeting has a lot of personal relevance for me because it was the very first IPVC that I attended as a PhD student at McGill University. Now, this particular talking stick was hand-carved by a Musqueam artist, Joe Becker. So why did we start this tradition of the talking stick? It comes from Indigenous history. For thousands of years, First Nations of the West Coast of North America used the talking stick at ceremonial occasions. And it's a way of indicating speaking authority and respect for communication by chiefs, elders, and all the other witnesses. The talking stick, when one's holding it, it gives one the honor and the responsibility to speak uninterrupted. And it also serves as a reminder to the witnesses of their vital role of listening thoughtfully. And once the stick has been passed, the honor of speech is transferred. So it's now that moment when I'm going to pass this virtual talking stick to Professor Sasagawa and to Professor Garth. And I would now ask that we see their message, please.
Hello everyone, I'm Suzanne Garland from the University of Melbourne, Royal Women's Hospital in Melbourne, Australia. And for those who don't know me, I'm a clinical microbiologist and a sexual health physician, and I've worked in HPV from clinical, diagnostic, as well as in a research capacity now for over 30 years. Now firstly, as the President-elect of IPVS, I sincerely thank Professors Margaret Stanley and Anne Birchall, the co-chairs of the 34th IPVC Toronto 2021 meeting. Together with Kenneth, we have been treated to a virtual conference of excellent standing, wonderful science, and utilising the skills of information technology to the uppermost, being a very interactive meeting, I'm sure you would agree. And it's with great pleasure that I invite you all to the 2023 35th IPVC meeting, which is going to be held in Kyoto, Japan. And hey, how timely is this when one considers that the only other time IPVC has been in Japan was actually in 1984 as the third international workshop of papillomaviruses, and it too was in Kyoto. It was hosted by Professor Yoki Ito, the Dean of the Faculty of Medicine at Kyoto University, in August of 1984. Now, the co-organisers and very eminent Hpv researchers were Tom Broker, Peter Howley, Gerard Ort, Ulf Pettersson, and Harold Zerhausen. At that stage, there were 117 participants from 11 countries. There were no concomitant sessions, but overviews presented on the molecular biology of papillomaviruses, human papillomavirus diseases, as well as animal papillomavirus diseases. Yet now, conferences have grown to around 1,500 participants coming from over 90 countries. Now, our tagline for the 35th IPVC is Coming Together for HPV Elimination. And we truly hope this will be a face-to-face meeting so that you can rekindle friendships with colleagues and establish new collaborations in the HPV world, as well, of course, enjoying the culture and cuisine of Japan. Now, our overarching theme will be translation of research, new discoveries, and education into clinical practice and public health to eliminate HPV and HPV-related diseases globally. Now, it's my great pleasure to pass you to my co-chair, Professor Toshiyuki Sasagawa. Thank you very much.
I am Toshiyuki Sasagawa. It is my honor that I become one of the chairs of this IPVC in Kyoto 2023. I would like to introduce myself, and other Japanese researchers had some contribution for Hpv study. I'm a clinician working in the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology in Kanazawa Medical University Hospital. My research career started as a basic scientist in tumor virus group in Institute for Microbial Disease in Osaka University in 1988. My mentor was Masuo Yutudo, who had learned about papillomavirus study in Institut Pasteur in Paris, and he was one of the pioneers for Hpv research in Japan. Using the system he established, I had first shown that Hpv 16, E6, E7 genes are able to induce dysplasia in the genital tract of mice in vivo. After graduation, I moved to tumor virus group of Imperial Cancer Research Fund in Cambridge, UK. The head was Dr. Lionel Crawford. Under his guidance, I succeeded to make Hpv 6 and 16 virus-like particles for Hpv vaccine using yeast protein expression system, which was provided from Dr. Massimo Tomasino, who is working in WHO now. After coming back to Japan, I worked as a clinician and continued Hpv studies regarding serology, epidemiology, pathology, and immunology. Now I'm keen to how to effectively detect pre-malignant and early stage of cervical vaginal cancers and how to treat these regions without any surgical procedure like conization and hysterectomy in order to preserve uterine function for the future pregnancy. Many Japanese researchers who are mostly senior than me had performed good Hpv study from 1986, especially Dr. Shigeru Yasumoto in Kanagawa Cancer Center has first shown that Hpv 16 DNA can transform mouse cell line in vitro. Dr. Motoyasu Sugase and Toshihiko Matsukura in National Institute of Infectious Diseases, Tokyo, Japan, isolated many high-risk and intermediate-risk HPV, such as HPV 58, 59, 67, 82 from cervical vaginal regions. And HPV 52 was cloned in my colleague Yasunari Takami in Osaka University. Dr. Toru Kiyono in National Cancer Center, Japan, clarified the mechanisms of cell immortalization by Hpv 16 E6 and found many E6 binding proteins which function to promote malignant progression. My first attendance of IPVC, this meeting was organized by Nobel Prize winner Professor Zorhausen in Heidelberg, Germany in 1990. From then, I have attended more than 2/3 of these meetings. Therefore, I love this conference and my main conference. And this conference gave me a lot of chances in my career. Kyoto is one of the oldest towns in Japan, where many old Japanese culture are still preserved. So all of you could enjoy walking around to see many beautiful temples and shrines and gardens where cherry blossom or plum blossom bloom, and touch some old Japanese culture too. You can see the video. I'm very happy to invite all of you to such a lovely town, Kyoto. By the way, I am originally from Osaka, where is the next town of Kyoto, and now I worked in Kanazawa, where it's northern area from Kyoto. It takes 2.5 hours by train to travel from Kyoto. If you had additional holidays, you could visit Kanazawa too, where you can see one of the best Japanese garden, Kenroku-en, castle, and World Heritage, Gokayama, and Shirakawa-go. You can also enjoy good seafood, sushi, sashimi, and formal Japanese cuisine named as kaiseki too. You also take a bath in famous hot spring spots there. Of course, you could search good food in Kyoto too. But you could take it more reasonable price in Kanazawa. Thank you for listening my presentation. ありがとうございました。皆様のお越しを京都でお待ちしております。Thank you.
Wow, I can't wait to get to Kyoto, and I really hope that IPVC 2023 is a meeting where we can all attend in person and connect again. I've been asked to give the final words of this closing session, and I just want to say that for me, this has been a great week and a great conference where I've heard really stimulating science and presentations and had many wonderful opportunities to connect with you. I want to remind everybody that you are going to continue to have access to all the great material that's been brought together for IPVC 2021. You'll continue to have access through the platform for 3 months. So please do take advantage to take a look at those sessions that you wanted to get to but maybe couldn't because there's been so many concurrent sessions. Really stimulating science and presentations and how to and of course, don't forget to fill out the conference evaluation surveys. We've all worked very hard to put on this conference, but one can always learn how to do better. And we'd love your feedback for future meetings to make them better and better each year. Now, there are a lot of people who made this meeting possible, and I want to just take a few minutes to stop and thank them. A huge cast of characters. So first, to the International Papillomavirus Society, thank you so much for your leadership of putting on a meeting like this every year and a half, approximately, to Margaret Stanley, Michelle Osborne, Robert Burke, Sylvia de San Jose, and Suzanne Garland of the Executive Board, and all the other members of IPVS who work on this issue all through the year. I also want to thank our local organizing committee for virtual Toronto, who consists of Eduardo Franco, Troy Grennan, Aisha Lofters, Gina Ogilvie, and Joel Pulewski, and has been outstanding support from Anna Young, who works with me at St. Michael's Hospital in Toronto. Huge thanks to the track chairs, workshop chairs, and their respective committees. Margaret Stanley, who chaired not only the Basic Sciences track, but also the Basic Sciences workshop. To Suzanne Garland for chairing the Clinical Sciences track. Joel Pulewski for chairing the Clinical Sciences workshop. Amy Kramer for the Public Health Epidemiology and Implementation Sciences track, and Mark Steban for the Public Health Workshop. And there were many others involved in those, putting together an outstanding scientific program within those tracks. I had a lot of help in support of early researcher program that we put on from our early career researcher committee, which included Jennifer Gillis, Anna Young, Eric Chow, Carrie Moody, Sam Campos, Barbara Masicki, and Greg Cement. Thanks to all of you for many meetings and plannings and your attendance this week. To the presenters and moderators of all the oral sessions, the special interest satellite symposia, the e-posters, the poster walkers, the daily recap video performers. My best guess is there's at least 500 of you. Thank you so much for this. There were 118 abstract reviewers. And then what makes it all happen behind the curtain is Kenneth, our professional conference organizer. And I really need to acknowledge some amazing people who I've gotten to know over the last 18 months or so, extremely professional individuals who work hard to make this happen. They include Yariv Galyam, Yana Vasileva, Katya Papkov, Yuliana Angelova, Victoria Madhilova, Margarita Velcheva, Coralie Degarville, Sherwin Gentle, and all the session technicians, recorders, and the entire Kenneth IT team that works tirelessly on the platform of these live sessions. There's a lot of working parts behind this little bit that you see on your screen. And there were 64 co-chairs moderating all these sessions. And of course, you, over 1,200 delegates who've joined us and been part of this meeting. So thank you. It's been an awesome week for me. I hope you've enjoyed it as well, and will continue to enjoy it over the next 3 months. I wish everyone good health, success in your ongoing research that I'm sure you will want to disseminate in a year and a half in Kyoto, and I hope to see you there.